let's talk about the errors in this video. Very often people get errors during their programming and they might be afraid of those errors. Actually, this is a part of programming or development process in general. Let's see what you can do in case you get some errors. I just have a empty file here where I try to write some code. So first thing you should understand is that there are different kinds of errors. For example, one might be that I try to assign a value into a variable, but I forgot to write something here. If I try to run this code, I will get an error. So it's shown here below this code part, and you can see that there are some red lines, which might be kind of frightening in the beginning, but there's nothing to be afraid of. And currently, what's shown here also is that I have invalid syntax. So basically, my syntax is not correct. This is one kind of error you might get during your programming. Usually this is not very common. I mean, in the beginning you probably have more of those, but later on this is not very common because you understand how to write code and you won't make any syntax errors. The second kind of error is something what can happen during the life cycle of the program. So currently what I try to do, I try to divide 6 by 0. If I run this code, I also get an error. But now the problem is different. What happened now is that the code actually was able, Python was able to execute this code, and the problem occurred during the execution of the program. So if I print something out here, let's say hi, and I run this program, you can see that the hi is printed out, but the problem happened on the second line. So basically, I tried to do something here which is not allowed, or what for the computer or for the Python is not allowed. I can do some additional printing here. So for example, let's print done if we are done, but we won't reach there because if an error occurs, the program is stopped. So basically the execution is terminated and the following code after that line is not executed. If we see what has happened here, or what does this red text say, we can see that there are a lot of information here actually. So the main maybe point here is that you can see the reason, what happened. And this is the last line usually. So there's a 0 division error, division by 0. So it should be basically understandable what happened here. So we try to divide by 0 and it's not allowed. Now the also important part is this line here, which actually is on 2 lines for me, but basically it's one line. It says that where in your code the problem occurred. So currently it says that it's on line 2. So I should know that if I go and see my program, on the second line there is something I should fix. Also in PyCharm, for example, there's a link here. So if I click on this link, the editor part automatically scrolls to this position and not highlights, but the cursor is put on this line. So you can easily get to the point where the error occurred. Now I can see that, yeah, okay, I have divided by 0, so it's probably not allowed. I should do something about it. Of course, currently this is very simple example. Usually you don't write a code like this. Rather you have a variable. For example, you ask a user the input, enter a number, and then you use this number or this variable and divide something by this. So for example, number is input and we use number here. So because it doesn't make sense to write actually code like this. So, but it can happen. You ask some input from the user, Now there are another problems also, because this input can be string and I cannot divide by string and so on. So there can be different problems if user input is involved. So, but yeah, it's more realistic example that you use some user provided input, or maybe you read this from the file or whatever, and then you use it in your code. So the problems or the errors you get during your programming, it's not really a huge problem. I mean, of course, it's nice that if you, for example, give your program to a client, that then you won't have those problems. But during the programming or development phase, it's okay to get those errors, especially if you are learning. So if you do those tasks here or whatever smaller tasks in programming in general, you don't have to be afraid of those errors. It's a nice way to get feedback from the interpreter in our example. So I try to write something, I try to give some input to this program and so on, and then if I get an error, then I get feedback that something is wrong and I can fix it. It's always wise to try different inputs. So for example, if I run this code and I enter 4 here, then everything is okay. Okay, let's print out the a also, the value of a. So if I write 4 here, I get 1.5. Now if I run it and I put a here, then I get an error. This is a different error as was before. So currently we try to convert a into integer, which is not allowed, and it says it here also. So invalid literal for int with base 10. Basically we use base 10 in general for numbers, so we count to 10 and then we or we have 10 different digits and then we switch on to 10 and 11 and so on. Okay, but and the different error would also occur if I write 0 here. Then I get this division by 0 again. So you should know that the errors is a part of programming, nothing to be afraid of. Just try to find all the possible kind of use cases. If you have user input, try to put different inputs there so you can see whether your program actually does or works in different situations. It would be nice to eliminate all the possible errors. So for example, here before division, I should actually check whether the value is 0. If it is 0, then tell something to the user or whatever. But currently the problem is if I get an error, the program execution is stopped. So nothing can go on. But for example, if it's 0, then I should say something that enter a different number, for example, because 0 is not allowed, and I can carry on. I can ask the new user input and go on with my code. Now let's have a example where I have a function divide, for example, a and b. Let's say that this is integer and this integer, and it returns float, and we just return a divided by b. So nothing special, basically the same thing I did here. I take this code and move it down here. No, not like that. So now the function is declared before the usage of this function. And instead of using just division here, I use my nice function divide and use basically the idea is same. I put here 6 and number. Okay, I will convert the input here. So the user input something, I convert it to integer right away, and then I can use this number. If I run this program, so it should do the same it did before. So if I enter 4, it divides 6 by 4. Now if I enter here 10, not 10, 0, I get the same error. But as you can see, the length or the length of this error message is larger. So there's actually 2 different links here also. And why is that? Let's see how the program execution works. So I have defined a function division. I use shorter version here. Divide a and b, and it returns return a divided by b. So this is basically the same code here, just handwritten. And then I call it out. I call divide, let's say 6 and 0. The rest is not important. What now happens? If I execute the code, first Python interpreter starts from the beginning and goes over every line. So first it takes this definition, it loads it into the memory. So we have this div function, and it doesn't do anything with that. The function is not executed because it's just definition here. Now it reaches here. There was some print here, so it printed out something. There was some print here. And now it reaches here. We are executing this line. Currently in my code it's line 6. And this is line 2. 1, 2. So, and we reach here. So now what happens is that before the program can continue, it has to calculate this value. Let's say we print it out also. P is for printing. We print it out. We want to print out what is the result of this division. And what happens is that before the print function can actually do something, it has to know what is the value. So first we have to calculate the value. Let's say it gets 6 here, then it prints the 6 out. But now what the interpreter does is that it finds where the function is defined. So basically it goes from here, it goes here. And it gets those values 6 and 0 here. And now it executes the next line, which is return, and it tries to, before it can return actually something, it has to calculate the result. So what it does, it tries to divide 6 by 0. And now we get an error. Now, in the first example or the previous examples, I just got an error and it pointed out the line where the error occurred. Currently, it does basically the same, but in addition, it also shows what is the cause or who was responsible of calling out this div function. It can happen, let's say, let's modify this function a bit. And let's say we have different callouts. So for example, we call it out with 4, with 2, and then the number the user inserted. It would be really hard to actually know what was the cause if I only would see this line in this error message. So, okay, I know that the line 2 is responsible, so the division by 0 is not possible, but it's really hard to find out where in the code this function was called with those parameters or arguments. So now what the interpreter or what the error message shows is also the line, this part here, the line where this function was called. So if I run this code again, let's modify the not syntax error. So here I will write 0 here. Now I get an error on line 2, but also on line 8. And now I'm able to, let's say we modified this code a bit. And now I get the error here, not division but 0, 7 and 8. Now I know that first what happened is that line 8 is responsible for this error, and inside that we get an error on line 2. Of course, the callouts can be, there can be several lines of those errors. Usually for complex programs it can be even, I don't know, tens or even hundreds of lines, because inside different functions you call out other functions, and inside those functions you call out other functions and so on. Because usually what we try to do, the program is like a huge problem. We divide it into smaller problems, but even every smaller problem can be divided into even smaller problems and so on. So usually you have several different lines here. You can click on those lines. So currently if I click here, I see that, okay, this is the call out part. If I click here, this is actually the reason or the endpoint where the error occurred. Often it is so that the last line is not even like the real cause of the problem, because, for example, this for the function it might be okay. So for function divide, it can be okay that you take two numbers and divide one by another. So the problem actually might be, in my case, this line here. So I have to do something with the user input. So, but this is something you will get if you have more experience. So what are the actual causes, or what should I fix in my code to get this problem eliminated or something like that. But yeah, one way would be to add if sentence here. So for example, if p is 0, then return, I don't know, 0 or something like that. So there are different ways to kind of solve those problems, but it depends on the problem and what you want to achieve and so on. But yeah, the main thing here is that the problems or the errors often occur. There's nothing too problematic about it. The main thing you should know is that you can see, first you should see the cause of the error, so what happened actually, and then you see where it happened. And don't be afraid to click those links and try to find out what was wrong and so on. And there are different kinds of problems also. So just showed you division by 0, but also, for example, let's say we have names, a lot of names, John and Mary, and now I want to print out names in position 4, for example. So if I execute my code, okay, there's input, let's say 5. Now I get an error, list index out of range. Again, it gives me a line where the error occurred, so it's the line 10, and it also gives me an error message. So usually the error messages are readable. You can, if you don't understand it, you can copy and paste it into a, I don't know, Google and find out what can be done and what is the real problem here. But yeah, still you can always click on the line and then you find out where the error actually occurred, and then it's easier to find those places, because currently my code is quite short, but if it's hundreds of lines of code, or even it's divided or it's split into different files, then it's very convenient to just click and find out where the problem happened. Also, we will talk about separately later on how to tackle the problems or exceptions. But this is a different topic, and for that we need to learn some more Python, and then we can actually see what is one way to kind of solve, not really to solve, but to kind of, if the problem occurs or the error occurs, you can decide to do something. So currently what happens is that if I get an error, the program execution is stopped. I cannot carry on. But there are ways to kind of catch those errors and continue working. But we will talk about this in a later video. So don't be afraid of errors. Know what you read from the error message. Read the message or the main cause of this message, but still be wary about, or don't be, I mean, you see also the places where this error occurred, and you can click on those links and then you can see what can be done in this place, or what caused the error, which part of the code called out this error and so on. So if you get this red text here, there's nothing to be afraid of. Just try to understand it. This is a normal part of developing. Just try to do so that in the end, if you submit your code, for example, or give it to the client, then you don't have those errors. So you have to fix them all before submitting your code or giving your code to a client. So good luck.